Well, this is a work session and on the equitable school day and transportation efficiency. So Laura's going to do a visual roll call and then I'll hand it over to Rob. Okay, Laura, you're set?
We're all good.
Okay.
Dr. Anderson, do you want to kick us off? There you go.
Yes, sorry about that. Thanks, Rob. Thank you, Tina. It's good to see everybody. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure. Okay, very good. So this evening, board, you're going to be hearing from Rob Price and the operations team around what work that really started several years ago with, and it was called the Ideal School Day. I think many of you remember that. And as I was conducting my first 100 days in the district and all throughout last year, there was a lot of really good ideas, I think, that were considered within the Ideal School Day. And a lot of our employees, our families wanted to know what's happening with that. And so I asked Rob to revisit this under the lens of transportation because that is really one of the big aspects of changing the school day in times of transportation. And we're reframing this from the Ideal School Day to the Equitable School Day. The Ideal School Day had some decisions that were in there that are not in what we're proposing today. So we wanted to make sure that we separated but honored the work of the Ideal School Day. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Rob Price and team.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Good evening, everyone. And you're going to see some unfamiliar faces on the call. So I want to start with introductions. We've had a lot of key players in this, and they're the ones that made this assessment successful. So I'm Rob Price, Assistant Superintendent of Operational Services. Robin, you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Robin Fernandez, Area Superintendent for the East Network.
Tony?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Tony Scala, BVSD for over 12 years in that department.
Thank you, Tony. Tasha?
Hi, good evening. I'm Tasha Prieto. I'm with Prismatic Services. I am working with Rob Jacobus as an external consultant on this project.
And Rob?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Jacobus. I'm the CEO and founder of School Bus Logistics, headquartered here in Denver, Colorado. Been in the industry for quite a few years, in the routing industry for over 20, and worked with school districts such as Jeffco, Aurora Public, Littleton, Westminster, quite a few in the Front Range here.
And I'll just say we hired School Bus Logistics through an RFP process in the fall of 2019, and we couldn't be more lucky to have both Rob and Tasha. They've been phenomenal through this whole process. I'm getting ready to share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Everybody see the presentation? Yep, all right. So to kick us off, to provide a little bit of background, in 2014, an MOU was adopted between the Boulder Valley Educators Association and the Board of Education, which directed the work of the Ideal School Day that Dr. Anderson just referred to. So Robin Fernandez will expand on that work here in a minute. As we were changing high school bell times last spring, we made a commitment to the board that we would continue to look for efficiencies in not only transportation, but also making sure we were providing equal opportunities for all students. So as you know, for many years in Boulder Valley School District, school start and end times have varied by school and by level, creating disparity throughout the system and equitable learning experiences for students and inefficiencies in district-wide services such as transportation. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Robin to talk about the progress the district has made addressing these disparities.
Thank you, Rob. So, yes, some of you may remember that the original charge of the MOU between BBEA and our Board of Education was quite broad. The group was charged with researching and developing a plan that maximizes success for all students, really focusing on time as a variable and as an asset. In addition, it was to incorporate flexibility and responsiveness really based on individual and small group student needs. It was to respond to groups of students who may require additional time in order to gain proficiency to the standards that could be inside or outside of the current instructional day, to develop a plan to increase creativity and innovation, and then to develop a timeline and guidelines to determine what the ideal school day schedule was while students were at school, PK-12. So as a result, a task force was created known as the Ideal School Day Task Force, and their focus in academics really was on time and scheduling and a consistent school day across PK-12 and across the entire district. So there were subsets to this work, but the main areas of focus included designating a specific length of school day. And so that was determined to be 7 hours at both elementary and middle level and 7.5 hours at high school, including 3 hours at both PK and kindergarten. Analyzing the internal schedules, meaning from start time to end time in the day for both elementary and middle, and then analyzing how teachers are able to receive professional development and collaborate on needs of small and large groups of students within their contract time. And so we actually have made quite a bit of progress on the tenets of that MOU. So as you know, we've standardized a later high school start time this year. We were able to implement a common plan time at elementary schools by being able to revise the specialist contract within the negotiated agreement. We've partially implemented the wellness recommendations. And most importantly at elementary, though elementary principals still anxiously await a standardized 7-hour school day for all schools, we've done a lot of work to standardize what instruction looks like in terms of expectations around best practices, primarily in literacy and mathematics. So Rob, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Robin. So current work, using time as the variable and as an asset to maximize success for all students, we looked to develop and recommend school start and end times for elementary, middle, and PK levels that provided equitable learning time for all students, as well as consistent and standardized professional learning time for school staff. So just a little bit about the process. We had 4 steering committee meetings and 1 subcommittee meeting over 4 months. That work took place from December 2019 through March of 2020. The subcommittee meeting was led by BBEA and focused on professional learning time and when that would occur. So this slide just shows you the team members that made up the steering committee, which consisted of principals or assistant principals from each grade level, vice president of Boulder Valley Educators Association, and leadership from the departments listed, and the consultants that were introduced this evening. So we established the following goals during our first meeting. The first one was standardize the length of school day by level. As you know, and as Robin just spoke about, we achieved this at the high school when we set the time to 7 hours and 15 minutes in 2019. Align bell times to national research regarding adolescent sleep patterns. Again, as you know, we achieved this last year when we set high school bell times to 8:30. Design an efficient and affordable transportation routing system to align to the new length of day. Standardize professional learning time to occur outside the school day using a late start or early release model. And finally, the last goal was to review and revise lunch times to provide students with a full 25 minutes to sit and eat. So we use the following principles to guide our work. First one being develop a well-balanced day for not only students, but also for staff. Consider the needs of elementary, middle, and high schools individually and as a system. Propose transportation recommendations that are cost neutral or results in a savings as much as possible. And consider employee negotiated agreements in making these recommendations. So those were the principles that guided our work and the goals that we just covered. So at this time, I'll turn it back over to Robin.
Thank you. So when we think about much of this core work and what remains essential from the Ideal School Day Task Force and what is part of the Equitable School Day focus is, well, this first piece we fortunately have addressed this year. The second really is key to what we would say is a guaranteed and viable educational experience for students across BVSD. We know how incredibly important it is for students and their families to know that they will receive a similar high quality experience with the same instructional infrastructure at any school. It should not depend on whether or not a student is merely lucky to land in a school that has a longer school day than what their peers receive in other schools. We as a system really should be providing that for all students in our district. And last, we know that the ability to deliver professional learning to teachers is essential. We have highly qualified, highly skilled teachers who have a focus and a passion for best practice and for continued learning, and we need to have a vehicle to provide them with that. And so this has always been true in order to create the high quality experiences that we value for our students. However, as we implement the strategic plan, it is the only way that we have in order to make sure that we have on a system-wide basis with fidelity to be able to provide our teachers with the support necessary to implement our new best practices. And Rob, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Robin. So as mentioned above, one of our goals was to standardize the length of day at each level that provides equal learning time for all students. As you can see, we've provided this opportunity at K-8, middle, and our high schools, but we do have disparities at the elementary level. So what this shows is the difference between a 6.5-hour day and a 7-hour day is 85.5 hours per year, or 13.1 days. This is all calculated instructional hours. You will also see that currently Pioneer, Nederland, and our K-8 schools are at 7 hours or longer. Pioneer is the only school which is at 7 hours and 20 minutes right now. And you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, all of our schools exceed the CDE minimum instruction hours, which is at the elementary K-5 is 990, and at secondary 6 through 12 is 1,080 hours. So with that, I will turn it over to Rob.
Thanks, Rob. What we're looking at is two options here, and what we're for bell times, and I'll explain the two charts here. The orange color is the first tier of schools that will go in. So first tier would be a set of buses would go in, drop off the students at the school, the bus leaves empty, and then goes and services the next school. And as you can see, the maroon color bars are the high school tier and the middle school and K-8 tier. So that would be considered a second tier. And you can see option 1 and option 2 laid out side by side. There are some exceptions that we've learned by working with transportation, is that due to traffic patterns and ways some of the campuses are set up, that Monarch High School and Monarch K-8 will keep the same bell times that they have now and so forth. Also, such as Flatirons and Foothills Elementary School, those schools would be at a different bell time, such as 8 to 3, because these schools service canyons, and we consider those canyon routes. And in the morning, what they'll do is they'll go up and bring down K-12 students from the canyons into the schools, and then get the students to the schools in the morning. So there are some exceptions to the majority of what we're proposing in these options. Go ahead, Rob, and we're ready for the next slide there. Thank you, sir. So the previous slide talked about the actual bell times. Now let's talk about the bus service windows. So what we try to do in transportation is plan about 10 minutes prior to the bell ringing, dropping off the students. So these are current bus drop times versus proposed bus drop times for option 1. And in the afternoon, kind of the same thing. We plan for the bus to arrive at the schools in the afternoon, sit and wait for students to board the buses, and then we schedule them to depart anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes according to how large the campus is or what school we're talking about. So this is the bus service windows compared to option 1. And then you can also see the change of difference from current to proposed. And here, go ahead, Rob, sorry about that. And here we're looking at option 2. Again, looking at the same kind of information, the current bus drop time versus the proposed bus drop time and the current change of what it would be for the students if we were to look at option 1 versus option 2. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rob. So just in summary of what we're looking at, the two big differences between option 1 and option 2. Option 1, middle school and the K-8 tier is at 8:55 a.m. start. Option 2, the middle school and K-8 tier is at 8:35 a.m. bell time. So cost associated with option 1, one-time cost of a little over $1 million. Several routes had to be added, therefore buses would have to be purchased. And then an ongoing cost of $233,000. Option 2 would be cost neutral to transportation. And again, that's the 8:35 a.m. bell start or bell time. Pros with both options. Both options, we achieve the uniform length of day at all levels. A uniform professional learning time at all levels that would occur with a late start on Wednesdays. High school buses arrive closer to the PM bell. So right now, high school buses arrive at 4:05 and depart at 4:12. And both of these models, high school buses, would arrive around 3:45 and depart at 3:52. And then we have mirrored routes, same morning and afternoon driver. So cons associated with each of the options. Of course, cost increase with option 1. Middle school students get home later at 3:55, and that was one of the challenges we ran into at the high school when we were just in high school bell times. With a lot of the feedback we were getting was 3:45 was the latest for parents to be able to get their kids to athletics or other events. Both cons, some variation in middle school and elementary school bells. As Rob referred to a little bit ago, we will still have some schools such as Southern Hills and Southern Hills Middle School due to the adjacency to Fairview. We have to make sure we allow enough time between the bells, which then pushes this off a different tier. Same thing with Monarch K-8, Monarch High School, Broomfield Heights and Broomfield, etc. Elementary schools get picked up earlier in both models. As Rob discussed, 7:45 a.m. is earlier across the board in most cases. And then some buses will drop off at 7:30 a.m. And that relates back to the elementary schools getting picked up earlier. So at this time, I will turn it over to Tasha.
Thank you, Rob. So you're running concurrent essentially with the effort to look at option 1 and option 2 with the school start time consolidation or working that out. We're looking at other cost-saving options as well. And so as we move into 2021, we're looking at a variety of other areas. The first idea that could potentially save money is providing students who attend high schools with good current RTD service with RTD bus passes instead of yellow bus service. So they would get an RTD pass, they would not get a yellow bus. The district is running a pilot for this program in a couple of high schools in 2021. Aside from saving money, this option could actually provide students with additional access to things like after-school jobs and being able to go to the library without having to get a ride from mom or dad. And so when we talked about this in committee with the education side of the house, it was viewed favorably in that way as well, because we're going to provide them with greater transportation freedom. Being able to remove high school buses from the equation, if we provide less high school service, obviously will save us some money and provide us with some flexibility in other areas. The next area that we're looking at is consolidating stops in neighborhoods. You know, when you're doing a bus route, you've got a couple of constraints. How long you can make that route, how much time do you have to run a route, and how many kids you can put on the bus. To the extent that you can fill the bus as much as possible and as few stops as possible, you can finish that route faster. And so about every time you stop a bus, generally for planning purposes, you're looking at adding 1 to 3 minutes to that run time, depending on how many students are getting on the bus. And so consolidating stops and reducing the number of stops overall could potentially save us money, because ultimately we can trim down routes by doing this. It's an incremental process, however. And so that'll be something we'll be working on in the fall. Reevaluating walk distances to school bus stops and ride times. These are things that we may develop into within current operations as new department procedures, or perhaps even department policies. Looking at enforcing walk distances, looking at are the walk distances that we have, reflective of current thinking. And then in particular, one of the pieces that appears not to have been explored previously in Boulder very much is looking at walk distances to bus stops. If I'm asking a student to walk a mile to school and they're in the walk zone, is it fair to say that the student who is in a bus zone only has to walk 150 feet? What's fair, equitable in those areas? And again, every time we can adjust those things, reduce number of stops or reduce the number of students who are eligible for transportation, we gain by having fewer students to plan for. Ride times is another area that might be a policy change. What's an acceptable ride time for the district? The transportation department's been operating with procedures in place for that, but we need to take a look at it and say, is it okay if a student's on a bus for 45 minutes? Is it okay if they're on the bus for 50 minutes? Because that 5 minutes of extra time could mean that we can consolidate some routes and reduce the number of buses. The last piece that we're looking at definitively for the fall is requiring families to opt in for bus service. This was something we talked about in, I think, February is the first time we talked about it, and the district is rolling this out. The benefits to do this are many. Historically, the transportation department, and Boulder in particular, you plan to provide transportation to any student who qualifies for bus service, anyone who lives in the transportation zone. And transportation departments temper that with what is essentially overbooking based on experience, because we know that some portion of the students will never use yellow bus transportation. They're always going to ride in the car with mom or dad, or they're going to, when they get to high school, they're always going to ride with their friends. What we don't typically know is which students are in which pile. Going to ride the bus, not going to ride the bus. And so asking students and families to definitively tell us enables us to do a much better job of planning as we go into the fall season. So we'll know who specifically is planning to ride the bus, and then a little bit of wiggle room, and who is not going to ride the bus. And so with that knowledge, we can plan better. On top of that, as we roll that out and go through the year, we're going to engage in looking at load counts to identify further opportunities to consolidate routes. Some families may say that they're going to ride the bus, but they ultimately do not, or vice versa. And then we're always looking at other possibilities for finding other savings, looking at alternative transportation options. Your district is one of the few that I've seen that's already rolling out things like hop, skip, drive. And so we'll look at expanding that. We're looking at some of the procedures in place for qualifying special education students for transportation. Are we doing that as well as we could? All of those kinds of things are rolled up in the work that we have planned for next year.
Thank you, Tasha. Really appreciate it. So just next step. So in conclusion, I think what you've taken away from this, we've got disparities at the elementary level. So we're not providing the same opportunity for all children. And we have an opportunity to correct that through this assessment. So next steps, we understand that changing start times has a major impact on the routines and work schedules of our families and our staff, as well as the greater community. I think we learned this at the high school level. We plan to utilize this coming school year, so 2021, to implement the pilot programs discussed and continue to explore and potentially implement the cost savings options that Tasha just referred to. And then we'll also utilize the next 6 to 8 months to seek community input on the proposed bell time changes to help identify the areas of greatest impact so we can help manage that change over the next year. That might be before or after student care, et cetera. So we'll be communicating these changes with your support. Once we have received community input and we've developed a plan to make the change more manageable, we would then move forward in the 21-22 school year with revising the bell times. So at this time, I'm going to open it up for discussion, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can open it up and then share it if we need to.
Okay, thank you so much. And board members, should we just go down alphabetically? Because it would just be helpful given my screen. So could we start with Richard?
Thanks, Rob and team, for your wonderful presentation. And it seems like you put a lot of work into it. I just have one quick question. And if you go to your goal slide,
Okay.
Because I got it on my other screen here. Let me just get to it. If you look at the last bullet, and the reason I want to ask the question is because I know that there was some Lafayette families that were looking and concerned about the lunch times. And they did a lot of work around that and worked with some of the principals and worked with Chef Ann and presented their concerns. And one of the concerns that they had was the lunch time that was provided before school recess or lunch recess. And the kids were not eating their lunches or anything like, or things like that, because they were wanting to get to school to lunch recess. So they were leaving a lot of food behind, even though we have the best nutritional program in the state. They were still not eating their food. So did the committee look at that by any chance?
So, Richard, we pulled that out of this assessment, and we had started that work with food service, and we did not reach conclusion. That will be a goal that we try to implement the full 25 minutes to sit and eat by the 21-22 school year. We have a lot of limitations when we start talking about food service. It's how many kids can we fit in the cafeteria, et cetera. So a lot of times with the small size of some of our cafeterias, we have to expand the lunch period if we give them a full 25 minutes to eat. So we have not finalized that, but that is still a goal that we would hope to implement by the 21-22 school year. And within the ideal school day recommendations, it was, if I remember correct, Robin, tell me if I'm wrong, recess before lunch, if possible. So we would address what your concern is making sure that we're having recess and lunch, providing that full 25 minutes.
Yes, Rob, you're correct. And these are conversations that we continue to have on an individual basis, because you're right, the physical space needs of each school is very different, in addition to the enrollment levels at each school. But it is something that is consistently on the radar of our principals, and we're always trying to troubleshoot to make those happen.
Okay. Richard, anything else?
No, just an additional comment. Chef Ann was in complete agreement with trying to get lunch before, or what is it, lunch after recess, because of the fact that the kids were leaving a lot of food behind and all of that. So, yeah.
Yes, big supporter, and she's the one leading that work, and she will continue to lead that work until we solve that.
Okay, Kathy?
Thanks, Rob, for the great work. I'll echo what Richard said. I must have missed it somewhere. Do you know what the pilot's going to be? Have you decided what the pilot's going to be?
The pilot for the opt-in program and the RTD, is that
Well,
what
the
you're?
last slide said develop pilot or implement pilot, so I wasn't sure what was all included in implementing pilot program.
Tasha, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So the opt-in process began as a discussion about a pilot, and Boulder pleasantly surprised me, and it is the plan for 2025. It has a pilot, perhaps in air quotes around it, only because this will be the first time that the district is doing it. But the transportation department and the IT department have already been working together in terms of how this will be, the technology piece will transfer this parent's choice over into the transportation database that they work with. And so, I feel like that it'll be tweaked probably for 21-20, but it's really only a pilot because it's the first time the district is doing it. There is good historical precedent for it in other districts around the country, and they have been looking at how it's been communicated to parents and what roadblocks there might be in making it as smooth as possible. The other piece that is a pilot is the RTD service. That's going to be rolling out in just a couple of high schools in the fall, because where there's existing good RTD service. And then the discussions, Landon Hilliard is the district staff member who's leading that project. And the hope is that if it works well for RTD and for the school district, the discussions will be with the RTD, well, how about let's increase service to some of these other places? Let's maybe make the bus stops, move it from here to here a little bit to make it better for our students, because you're bringing a huge number of riders to them. And then we have to work through the technical challenges of how do we get RTD bus passes to students. Those are monthly passes right now. Is there going to be a student pass that could, make it a lot easier for you to roll those things out? So those pieces are pilot, and with my hope is that eventually we can eliminate almost all high school bus service, except for where there's no possibility that RTD will ever run routes there.
Like Netherlands.
Yeah.
I'm sure, Rob, you'll just tell us about this later, because if we're having to social distance, none of this makes a whole lot of sense, but I'm sure that's part of your planning, and when we make that decision, we'll hear back from you on that.
We had a phone call on that today to discuss what our next steps are and the messaging, et cetera. So yes, we will report back to you.
All right, so thank you. I understood the part about, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to do the opting in instead of trying to just guess and plan around that. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And working with RTD, I'm really excited about. So if those are the two pieces of the pilot, it sounds good to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, Donna? Do you have any questions?
No, I don't really have any questions. Kathy brought it up and Rob answered. It was more on the load count and how RTD was going to implement their own strategies for the distancing and how that will impact parents' opt-in decision on what it's going to look like for parents. But I know that's, it's TBD.
It's TBD and not yet determined. We haven't finalized our transportation plan yet. So, but good question.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Donna.
Okay, Kitty, do you have any questions?
Yes. A couple of questions. One of them was, what about high school bus service? Because I didn't see it on the list. So that's going to stay the same until we can figure out how to not have it. Is that correct?
So high school bus service will stay the same, except for the pilot that we're going to be implementing in 2021. That really has an effect on Boulder High School and Boulder Tech. Otherwise, it doesn't affect any other high school in the district. So then if that is successful, we would look at rolling out RTD service in 21-22 for all of those schools that have access to RTD stops.
Which schools don't?
Monarch doesn't, Broomfield High doesn't. Anybody else? Netherland, maybe? Tony, you want to comment?
Yeah, just Netherland, and Broomfield has limited access, but yeah, That's the only, those are the three.
So Monarch,
Okay.
Broomfield, and Netterville.
Yeah, I figured Monarch didn't, since I live near here. Then the other question I have is, RTD's schedules are all over the place right now, and I'm hoping that all of this social distancing and, nobody going out eventually goes away, and we'll have RTD service that can service those schools. But I guess if we don't, we just keep on using the yellow buses for them, or what?
That is correct. Yeah, we'll plan around RTD. If they can provide the service, we'll implement the pilot. If they can't, we'll continue to provide service with our yellow buses.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Lisa?
Thanks. Yeah, I have a few things that stand out to me as a working parent of an elementary school, a bunch of elementary school students. We're never leaving elementary school. So the first one is obviously the early start time, and I'm sure it's been discussed, but I feel like I want to toss out there that younger elementary school kids take a long time to get ready in the morning. So a 7:45 start is probably a 6:15 wake up, which is going to get some, grumpy kids who are struggling to focus throughout the day. The bigger concern I see with this schedule is the 2:45. That's something that ends right before 3 instead of right after 3. Means for all parents who do meeting work like I do, that we can't schedule 2 o'clock meetings. And for all folks who do shift work that ends on the hour, that they can't take schedules that extend till 3 o'clock. So I think for a lot of us who have jobs, that's going to be a significant setback in how well we get through the day. I had some questions about the opt-in with the bus, just to make sure I understand it. So the way we use the bus is that we generally don't, but we know that we can sign up at any time during the year. And then we do use it sometimes. My kids will go home with their friends if they have play dates on the bus. If I have a sick kid who I don't want to take to campus, I can call the school and have the other kid come back on the bus. Or if I have a sitter at home, then, I don't want the sitter driving the kids, so they can take the bus and come home and meet the sitter. So can we do things like that with the opt-in, or do we decide over the summer whether or not we're going to use it, and that's the decision for the entire year?
Tasha, have you seen that as it's a rolling enrollment process, correct?
Correct. And the first cut that we would do this spring is ask parents, are you going to put your kid on the bus? Is that your primary plan, putting your child on a bus? Or is your primary plan, no, my kid's never getting on a bus? And that is a big chunk of students, my kid's never getting on the bus. I could have answered that for my kids all 12 years. My kid's probably not ever going to get on the bus, especially after they get kicked off as first graders and just determine they cannot ride the bus. But then there's always a way to get back onto bus service. You mentioned a couple of things that are sort of intermittent. My child wants to ride home with another child on a different bus potentially, or I've got a friend coming home and they're riding home on the bus. Those are things that would continue to be potentially possible. We just have to have a notification process. In talking in the committee, one of the things that came up was, taking away bus service from high school students, potentially, if they had a car on campus or something. Normally what you do is, you need to provide the transportation department with some notification that you're going to be opting back in if you're going to need service. The student was driving themselves, and so they opted out. Students no longer driving, they need to opt back in. And usually it's a couple days notice. The reality of it is, with transportation departments, however, is, there's usually at least a few empty seats on the bus. We're never that good at planning to fill the bus completely. And so usually we can informally accommodate a request like that, almost immediately, and then formally accommodate it with a couple of days notice. And so that's how it would be played. But what tends to happen is, we use it as a good rough cut. What Tony and his department do right now is they plan to provide transportation for all the students in the transportation zone. But they know based on experience that a big chunk of those kids aren't ever going to come. And so they overbook just like airlines used to overbook before coronavirus. But they have to play that guessing game every year. This helps them start with a much cleaner base of, okay, we know that instead of planning for, potentially this zone that has 100 kids in it, potentially riding the bus, 50 of them have said they're never going to ride the bus. So now I only have to plan for 50. And it just gives us a better planning guideline. But in anything we do in transportation, it's never, completely full all the way to the brim with students. But our goal is to try to minimize the number of buses we have with, less than 10 or 15% capacity. Again, ignoring what might happen with social distancing in normal times.
Yeah, Lisa, just to expand on that, in rough numbers, we have 10,000 eligible transportation students, and we have approximately 5,600 that ride. So starting with this opt-in program, we'll have a better idea how many people are riding, and then it'll just be like our enrollment process. You'll be able to enroll in transportation at any time.
And, did someone want to address whether there's flexibility in either option on the start time for elementary?
Rob, do you want to address that? It's really
we did look at doing an 8 o'clock, closer to an 8 o'clock start for the elementary school. But what we discovered, the way that the routes are structured and where the distances everybody's got to go, we need about 35 to 45 minutes in the morning between bells, and about 40 to 50 minutes in the afternoon between school bells. So with the high school locked in at an 8:30 start time to 3:45, that kind of limits where we can move that elementary bell closer to an 8 o'clock start. We could look at an 8 o'clock start, but then we might need to reduce the 7-hour day to a 6-hour and 50-minute day to get to a closer 8 o'clock start. So there's that balance between having a 7-hour day versus a 6-hour and 50-minute day to make the 8 o'clock start work, or shifting it altogether to 15 minutes. So we did look at that as another option, but we didn't get too far into it.
Yeah, and I will say, as one of the, and we didn't talk about this, we said high school bell times could not change when we started this assessment. So we locked in that 8:30 bell time, and then we planned around that, because all the time we spent, all the feedback we got from parents, et cetera, 8:30 to 3:45 is where we ended up. So that pushed us to that 7:45 bell time. And then we also, it was a 7-hour day as our goal. So that's what we've worked around. So those parameters have locked us into that 7:45 start time.
Okay. Lisa, any other questions?
No, maybe just to emphasize again that I think the earliness is difficult, but I think the much harder piece is the other side of it. That I know, and like I said, anybody with shift work who has to end at 3 o'clock, they're out of luck, right? If you have to be there 15 minutes early instead of 15 minutes later. Right now, our school ends at 3:15. So I know lots of folks who are doing shift work who end at 3 o'clock. And I definitely appreciate that I can work until 3 o'clock with meetings, and take 2 o'clock meetings and take 2:30 meetings. So I just think it's going to have a really big impact on working parents, especially those who are single working parents, or working parents where only one works in the city and has to do all of the pickups and drop-offs.
And I would just say, over the next, as I commented, over the next 6 or 8 months, that's the type of feedback we want to hear. So how can we plan for that, right? Is that aftercare programs for our students? But that's exactly what we're going to be looking for as we go out and communicate this change.
Okay, Stacy, any questions?
No, having a Z last name means I have no questions. They were all answered. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. Right now, a lot of the bus riders are, not a lot, but there's a segment of bus riders that are open enrolling into schools. Will they have the same opportunity and access to get on buses to go to schools that are not their neighborhood schools?
Yes.
Okay.
And Tony, do you want to comment on that? I mean, that's just really
Yeah, the space available program that we've been running for years will not change. And it all gets down to, if there's space on the bus, we're going to grant them the ability to ride. So nothing's going to change regarding that.
And then will we take into consideration if we do eliminate routes because we find that the bus is within the walking area and perhaps a hazard has been fixed since that legacy route was established, what the traffic impacts will be This is somewhat of an issue in the city of Boulder where I know of at least one route that's a legacy route type or grandfathered in. And this came up during the last time we did this. I was on the board then. Will we take that, because it will put, 50 cars on the road in that case. Will we
Right.
take that in consideration?
That exactly, Tina. So what I've asked the team to start looking at is what is the bus utilization? And if we were to take that bus away, how many more cars would we be introducing to that school site? So Tony and Landon Hilliard are working on getting those numbers right now. So when we start assessing those hazard routes that used to be hazard routes, we're thinking about that because there's a lot, for example, Metal Art built new, a lot of this infrastructure wasn't in, but we can't handle much more car traffic around that site either. So yes, we will be looking at all of that.
Yeah, and I appreciate the work you're doing. We did the transportation analysis 7 years ago, and it's incredibly hard to change costs in transportation in this community. And I can only just wish you luck. It's very, very hard. So thank you for trying.
Thank you.
We've got, I hope you see it. We've got a good team. We've got a great plan going forward. I'm excited about, this is a great way for operations to have a significant impact on instruction by changing time. So a lot of work is went into this.
Okay. Any other final comments or questions? Because I think we could take a quick break and then sign into our other phone call. Everyone okay with that? All right. So let's meet back in 9 minutes on the other line from the other link. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.